make a start. So if speakers, you don't mind turning cameras on, turning mics on. We've got everyone looking good. Panelists, can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Excellent. Jen, have we got a visual of Jen? Perfect, full house, excellent. Hi everyone, I'm Michaela, I'm from Claremont. Thank you very much for joining today. We've had over 300 people, or perhaps bots, who knows, register for this event from all over the world, which is really great news. We've had a lot of charities, local authorities, NHS, universities, even a few competitors. Sharing is caring, of course, so welcome to all of our competitors. If you haven't already, please use the chat function, introduce yourself and tell us who you are and where you come from. Sound like Cilla Black, don't we? Especially what organization you're from, we'd love to know that as well. This is my first time chairing one of our events today, which is very exciting for me anyway. I'm joined by my very glamorous assistant, Emily Rayner, who will be filtering through your questions. So please ask your questions throughout. You can see that there is a Q&A function on the bottom right of your screen. So feel free, as speakers are kind of going, to ask anything you'd like, and we'll try and get to as many questions as possible at the end. So the topic of today is from awareness to behaviour change. It's a topic that isn't just close to Claremont, but is also very close to me. I spent a long time working in advertising. Sorry, I had something in my eye there. I'm not just emotional about advertising. And we only really did awareness, awareness of a new product or awareness of an old product, awareness of an idea, awareness of a sponsorship. You get the gist. So it's been really exciting working at Claremont and kind of looking at individual, societal, systemic behaviours and how we can affect change in a really meaningful way. And we've got some really good speakers today who are hopefully going to elaborate on that point. And I'd like to just introduce them now. So I'm just going to refer to my notes. First of all, we'll hear from the renowned magician of behavioural design, I've called you, Mr. Samuel Salzer. Can you give us a wave, Sam? That's Samuel. Samuel is an expert in habit formation and digital behaviour change. He also co-hosts the Behavioural Design podcast. He's a coach, although I've written couch in my notes. I'm pretty sure he's not a couch. An author, and he's based in Sweden, where all the best things truly happen. So welcome, Samuel. Samuel's also a Claremont associate who we've worked with many times. So welcome back. Next, we will hear from the indomitable Mr. Tim Parry. Tim, do you want to give us a wave? Hurrah. Tim is the Director of Communications, Brand and Digitals, pretty much everything, at Alzheimer's Research UK. Tim will be joined by his worthy co-conspirator, Mr. Ian Fannin. Ian is a Capricorn. He enjoys long walks on the beach. No, I'm kidding. Ian is representing Claremont's contribution to Think Brain Health, which is a brilliant platform that I've also been honoured to work on. And it supports midlife adults in improving their brain health. I'm not yet midlife myself, so I'll let Ian talk to you a bit more about that. And finally, we're really pleased to have Jen Edwards with us. Want to give us a wave, Jen? There we go. Genevieve, or Jen to friends, I think we're all friends here on the webinar, is a proud Chief Executive of Bowel Cancer UK. I'm sure a lot of you will know about Dame Deborah James, or Bowel Babe as she was known, who sadly died in June. So Jen worked with and continues to work for Deborah, and incredible things have been achieved since June, and Jen will tell us all about those. So that's all from me. Before my dulcet tones send you to sleep, I would just like to offer a very quick plug. We're really pleased to be able to bring these events together and also to make them free. We'd really appreciate if you'd follow us on LinkedIn. We're also on Twitter under @ClaremontComms, and we will be tweeting along with this event if you'd like to have a look at that. And feel free to sign up to Clare Mail, which is our very occasional newsletter, which you can sign up to via our website. We're not on TikTok, despite my protestations, so that's about it. And with all of that further ado out of the way, I would like to hand over to the wonderful Samuel Salzer. So other panelists, if you,
Sorry to interrupt. There's a message on the Q&A from someone saying they can only see the main speaker. I've also had a note from a colleague saying that too. I think we might have a little technical hitch, that people can only see you, not our panelists, apparently.
Oh no, that's not good.
So, but hopefully when Samuel shares his screen and starts talking, that might resolve itself, but I just wanted to flag.
Great, okay, I'll have a look at that in the background. And Sam, if you don't mind sharing your screen, and if other speakers could go on mute and stop their video.
Okay, testing.
Okay, that looks all good. I'll do a bit of playing around with the cameras in the background, but feel free to go ahead, Samuel.
Okay, thanks you, Michaela, for introduction, and really good to be here talking about something that's very close to my heart, which is understanding behavior change with a bit more nuance. So a little bit about me. So what I do is I am really passionate about how we can understand behavioral science in practice. So I mostly work with big interventions, usually digital interventions, trying to not only change one behavior, but thousands or millions of people's behavior, oftentimes in either health or sustainability. And so I've seen and experienced behavior change in most contexts and in most places, and oftentimes in the most challenging contexts. So I certainly personally have learned throughout the years the challenges of trying to change behavior. But still, I think it's one of the most exciting things to work with. It's certainly something you learn a lot about through every day working with. So hopefully you'll learn some new things today from this presentation. I aim to kind of set the scene here a little bit to talk about the role of awareness in behavior change, sharing some science, some case study, and some takeaways. I'll be pretty short, so this would be like a little bit of an energy boost, hopefully, to give you some initial thoughts, some initial ideas and perspectives. And with that, I'll be starting with some really, I don't know, usually I would probably take money to share these kind of advices, but I'll give you guys this for free. So did you know that regular exercise is great for your health? And also that saving money is really good for pension savings and a rainy day. And if you fly less and take public transport, it's great for the environment. So you probably knew this. This was probably not that big news. I was kind of making a joke there initially, because we know that most of us don't have six packs. We know that most actually Americans can't afford to pay an unexpected $1,000 bill. And we know that the average UK citizen is far and above over the whatever targets are set for climate action. Their CO2 equivalents are way higher. So clearly there's something going on here. And the basic idea is that we can oftentimes be aware of a lot of things. We can be aware of the gym, the savings, and the benefit of taking public transport, but still obviously doesn't mean that we do these things, that we take action. And what I think is the most fascinating part for me, being a behavioral scientist, is that still we can see this kind of very open and clearly for all of us in our daily lives and in the lives around us. But when we look to change behavior, the first thing we try to do is give people more information. It's the classic tactic that I see over and over and again, this idea that, okay, well, maybe they just don't know enough information. Maybe you just have to give them a little bit more information, and then suddenly the behavior will happen. So what I'm going to try to do now is kind of share a little bit why that maybe sometimes fails to really hit the mark, and how we could think about with this at a little more level of nuance. So enter the Convey model. So Convey model is one of many models to try to explain what makes behavior happen. I would say it's one of the best ones. It certainly has a lot of value from a lot of showcases in how it's been implemented. And I like it because it kind of has this kind of balance of complexity and simplicity. So this graph is a little bit overwhelming perhaps, but as you can see, the behavior is influenced by a lot of things, but according to the Convey model, mainly capability, motivation, and opportunity. So to give you a brief primer, what this means is that when we say capability, we mean that for behavior to happen, the individual who's going to do this behavior has to have certain physical and psychological capabilities. They also need to have a social and physical environment that provides them the opportunity to do this behavior. And then lastly, they need to have a combination of reflective and automatic thought processes that motivates them to take action. So this kind of combination of capability, opportunity, and motivation was basically needed for behavior to happen. And there's some sub-dimensions as well that I'm going to get to now, which is that if you look at these, in total 6 sub-dimensions, so each of these capability has 2, motivation has 2, and opportunity has 2. In total, there's 6 sub-dimensions for this model. And so it's interesting to ask yourself, where does awareness fit in? If we think about giving someone the awareness of the benefit of behavior, where does that fit into this model? So about here. So clearly, if it's into reflective motivation. So if you have the awareness per definition, you're aware that there's some good things that has to do with doing this behavior. So you're probably able to consider the pros and cons and understand that there's some pros with doing this behavior, perhaps. And it might contribute to psychological capability in the sense of like their knowledge of what it means to do this behavior. So obviously with awareness can sometimes knowledge grow as well. But when we think about these things from an overall perspective of behavior change, it's quite easy to see that just because someone has the knowledge and, let's say, the reflective motivation, they can still have a lot of obstacles to doing this behavior. So they can still have a lot of things that stands between them and trying to actually take action. So taking public transport, they might know that there's they have the awareness that their driving has huge, effects on their CO2 equivalents. And they might know that taking the bus is good and they want to even take the bus, but the bus stop is far away, taking the car is quicker, everyone else at their work is taking the car and they have been driving to work forever. It's their habit of driving. You can see how these things, if you balance the scales, probably the right side is a little bit heavier. Same thing with someone trying to save money. They know saving is good, they want to save more, but credit card makes it really easy to spend. Seeing friends buy new things and sharing them on social media makes them probably want to buy things as well. They have a habit of online shopping. And honestly, who thinks that saving more today is more fun than buying something new, going on an exciting experience or doing something? Obviously, spending money is in general more dopamine like than saving money. So you can see how just having the knowledge and the want might not be enough to really balance the scale or actually get someone to take action. And so the basic idea here, that hopefully this will kind of set the scene for today's presentations, is that awareness can be a spark. I'm not saying that awareness is not valuable. Awareness can be tremendously valuable. It can be a really wonderful thing in sparking change, but that doesn't mean that it's enough to really make that change happen. So it can be a spark, but it might not always be enough to light the flame. And so a good case study to really, hit this message home is from something you maybe are familiar with. This is something that happened in the UK and also around the world. The data is mostly from the US here that I'll show, but the 5-a-day campaign started in the 80s, 90s where they realized that people were not eating as much vegetables as they should. And so the basic campaign was that if you eat 5 a day, that's enough to kind of keep the doctor away. And that's something that we can all aim for. So the message was simple: eat 5 fruits or vegetables per day, and you'll be able to keep the doctor away. And so when they started to measure awareness here, they noticed that in 1991 in the US, when they started to really measure this, there was 8% awareness that eating 5 a day was enough, or like that you should eat 5 a day pretty much, and that's a good thing. And so then they went on this multi-million-dollar campaign. They went on ads in radio, on television. They had, celebrity people kind of saying how good this was. And by 1997, I think it was here, there was a big jump here. You could see that awareness had increased from 8% to almost 40%. So you can see how they would celebrate here. Like, we have increased awareness by 400% almost. Like, that's huge. That's a massive increase. And usually I have this a little bit earlier in the presentation and I ask people, what do you predict the behavior change was? But you can probably know here that I'm using this example because the behavior change was 0%. 11% of people were consuming five or more a day in 1991, and 11% of Americans did that in 1997. It has increased, but only to 13% today. So we're still in America, in the US, it's quite far below what would be a ideal scenario. And so this highlights this kind of huge gap that just because someone had the awareness, there might be a lot of more important barriers, which was maybe affordability, access, knowing what to cook, how to cook, and so on, right? And so just knowing that you should eat it is not enough to actually make it happen. And so some final thoughts, and the real challenge is that we all have oftentimes good intentions. And intentions is great, but intentions does not always equal action, in the same way as awareness doesn't always equal action. And intention action gap is massive. It's one of the big things that you have to kind of understand as an applied behavioral scientist, is that you assume that giving people information will be enough, but then actually that's just the beginning. And the intention action gap is really big. And for me, working with long-term behavior change, working with digital health and other kind of long-term behavior change interventions, I have to think about habits and realizing that the intention habit gap is even wider. And so my goal here is, ironically in some ways, to make you now aware that awareness is not enough. And that the hard truth is that it's hard to change behavior, and we need to go beyond telling people what to do. And so the main thing is that, of course, it's great to increase awareness, but we really have to think about what are the barriers to behavior change. Is it awareness, or it could be other things? And really understanding that will unlock what is necessary for the behavior to happen. So awareness is in many ways just the start. And I love this quote to end with from Edward Deci, who is the co-creator of the Self-Termination Theory, because he says this, that the proper question is not how can we motivate others, but rather how can we create the conditions within people being able to motivate themselves. So what he's in fact saying here is that, of course, it can be great to tell people you should do this, try to get them excited and so on, to get them motivated. In other words, building their awareness of the good action they should do. But maybe we should focus more on creating a context in which it's easy and fun for them, for example, to do the desired action. So that's it, at least for me. I hope this was a good primer for today's presentations, and there's going to be some great stuff coming after me here. If you want to chat, feel free to go on to calendly.com/Samuel Salzer and book a virtual coffee. My website is also a good place to connect with me. Love to hear from people listening and hear what you're dealing with in the behavior change world. But yeah, I'll leave that from me. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Samuel. That was really, really great and a really good start to the session. Sorry to anyone if we're having any view issues. Surprise, we're actually in the same room. So we're going to ask a couple of questions, if that's all right, Samuel. I know you can only stay for the first kind of half an hour of this, so really appreciate you joining. And Raina's going to kick us off with a question, I think.
Thanks, Samuel. You obviously have a wealth of knowledge. You've been doing this for a long time. I wonder if you had any advice for people just starting out in the behavior change space. What could they do first? What would be some of the kind of initial things they might look into?
Yes, I think the best thing you can do oftentimes when it comes to understanding behavioral science is taking the kind of call it the feedback loop approach. So instead of thinking that you should try to learn everything at once, try to find a way where you can kind of every week read something, learn something, and then really try to see how that could apply in your life or at work, and kind of do it that way. I think most people try to learn behavioral science without using behavioral science. And so they kind of go about it of like thinking that they have to read 100 books in order to start thinking about these things. But the best way in some ways is to just kind of start, small steps all the way. I have a newsletter, Habit Weekly. Feel free to subscribe to that, where we share some top insights every week of what to read and what to follow. But I think that's a good way. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's excellent. Samuel, feel free to put a link to Habit Weekly in the chat before you drop off. That'd be great. We all kind of follow that, and it's really, really useful, actually. I actually had a question which I haven't prepared you for, I'm sorry. And it's around this kind of rise of sort of tiny habits. Now we talk about atomic habits, and really like almost micro chunking individual steps. They're sometimes so small that for the user, it seems to us they don't really get very much from it. Do you think there's too much of this going on? Are we sort of chunking too much, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, so it's really interesting talking about the person I mentioned, Edward Deci. Self-Termination Theory kind of postulates these three core psychological needs that we have. And, one of the ones is competence and a sense of kind of achieving a progress. And so I think oftentimes what can come at the cost of a tiny habit is the sense of feeling that you're building competence, you're feeling positively challenged. And so obviously it can be somewhat demeaning if you're told, hey, just take, take 10 steps a day, whatever the goal is. If it's not, in some ways positively challenging, it can feel a little bit, not really that you're really getting stretched in a positive way. And so oftentimes the best thing you can do is kind of combine these ways. So you kind of try to help people see that, okay, let's set a goal that's a little bit beyond where you are now. So it's like you're positively challenging yourself. You're taking 5,000 steps a day today. Maybe you can do 500 more tomorrow. But while that being said, you can still formulate it in a way like, what is the domino behavior in some ways? Like, what is the first step for you to get started? Is to put on the shoes? Is it to get out of the door, and so on? So I think that offers the good middle ground where you kind of make it really easy to get started, but then don't end up making people feel like they're kind of talked to like they can't do anything, So I think that's a good balance.
I think that's great. That's actually very useful when we talk about think, brain health in a minute. And I think we might even come back to that in your absence at the end. Have we got any more questions?
Yeah, I think we've probably got time for one more. So Will King has given a little bit of context here, so I'll just read this first and then I'll give you his question. He said, a lot of awareness fails to transition into action because of a lack of agency that many individuals have, particularly around healthy behaviours. Is there anything within behavioural science that's starting to really encompass inequalities? Any theories or frameworks that really focus on that inequality aspect?
I think it's a lot of them. I would look at a fantastic model that I would say goes kind of, so I think Convey is a great one to set the stage, but if you want to go even further, there's a fantastic model called the behavioral drivers model. It was developed by Vincent Petit and his team at UNICEF. And what's very unique with that model compared to pretty much any model that exists is that it was developed through work around the world, not just in one kind of Eurocentric or American-centric country. And so it's a very broad model. It covers a lot of ground, but it can be really useful to kind of prime people to think a little bit beyond what they maybe usually consider for some of these challenges, as you mentioned. And in that model, some of the more, as was mentioned, the kind of the limitations of agency is, I think, much more covered there. So I'm happy to link to that as well, behavioral drivers model, but I'll link to it here in the chat too.
Yeah, great.
Thanks, Sandy. That's really helpful. We'll let you go now. Thank you so much. Really great to have you.
Thank you, as always.
Thanks, everyone. Really nice to be here.
And now we're going to hand over, drum roll, please. Right now, we don't have a drum. I'm going to hand over to Tim and Ian, who are going to talk to us about Think Brain Health. Please keep your questions coming in the Q&A. There we've got Tim and Ian. I think, Ian, are you sharing the screen?
I am.
Excellent. Great. So I will go off video and mute myself and hand over to Ian and Tim.
Okay, and it's me, Ian, I think, isn't it, to start us off. I'm immediately feeling guilty having watched Sam's presentation about all the things we could and should be doing with this campaign, but we are still in the early stages of it and learning how to, well, not if learning how to walk, at least trying to get into jogging territory with this. But over the next 15 minutes or so, Ian and I are looking forward to talking to you about why it's time that we should all be thinking brain health. So we're going to Chris Whitty this, if you can go on to the next slide, Ian. Now, the context here, of course, is dementia. So I work for Alzheimer's Research UK, and we focus on all forms of dementia. So this is just a snapshot of the issue of dementia in 2022. So there are around 1 million people, approaching 1 million people in the UK with a form of dementia. Today, 55 million people around the world. 1 in 2 of us know someone close to us affected by dementia, a family member or close friend. Certainly, whenever I get in, it passes the taxi driver test. Whenever I get in a taxi in London and say who I work for, there's always a story that comes back from the front seat about a husband, a wife, a mum, a dad who's affected. I'm sure many of you here today have got your own stories too. It is the UK's leading cause of death, and actually it's been the leading cause of death for women for the last 11 consecutive years, including during the pandemic, which I think surprises a lot of people. So, it really is a huge issue and impacting in so many different ways, including, if you want to look at it in cold, hard economic terms, £25 billion annual cost to the United Kingdom, which is greater than cancer or indeed heart disease. So a big deal, and we're trying to do something about this. Ian, if we can move on. And what we're trying to do, of course, is to fund research. That's what Alzheimer's Research UK does. We have our eyes on trying to invest £250 million in research by the time 2025 comes around. And you can see how our research spend has increased in recent years in that graph at the top there. Pandemic flattened us off a little bit, but we're hoping to get back to growth because the more research you can fund, the more answers we can find, and the more we can help people with dementia today and tomorrow. Now, our research is organised around 3 different programmes. So that's around risk reduction and prevention, diagnosis, early detection, and developing new treatments. But brain health is all about reducing risk. So we're going to focus on that today. I think there's a little animation that comes up here, Ian, quite excitingly. There we go. So we'll move on to the next slide. So there really must be an emphasis on prevention in a dementia space because the opportunity is enormous and quite exciting, really, if you bear in mind the impact of the condition. So the Lancet Commission in 2017 initially did a huge meta-analysis of evidence around the potential for dementia risk reduction, and they published those findings and found that around 33% of cases of dementia could be linked to factors that might be within our power to influence. They updated this data in 2020, including even more papers, even more studies into the fold, and that increased to 40% of dementia cases that could be within our power to avoid. But the problem we've got is if you talk to people about dementia prevention, particularly in midlife, which is where the opportunity really is, it doesn't connect with people. They just think that's about old people, that's too far down the line, that's not about me, and I'm not going to engage with that. So we needed to think about how can we best deliver this payload of crucial knowledge around dementia risk reduction in a way that would meet people where they are. If we go on to the next slide, because this is what we're up against, only around 1/3 of people think it's possible to do anything about their dementia risk at all. And that compares to other data you can see on the screen. People understand their agency in reducing their risk of diabetes or heart disease, or indeed stroke, but a really low level of people who realise they can do anything at all about dementia risk. So our hypothesis, Ian, if we can move on, was to reframe the whole idea of dementia prevention into the idea of brain health. So rather than this campaign, this push being about the avoidance of something bad further down the line. It was more about the preservation of something good now and throughout life. It was our hypothesis that if we talk to people around through the language of brain health, then we might be connecting with people a bit more positively. So to explore this this idea, we worked with the Royal Society of Public Health in 2018, 2019 to explore this with the public, and we did huge amounts of quant and qual work around public perception of brain health. But there's seeds of data that came out of that, but this stat on screen is the one that most resonated with me. If you remember that only around 1/3 of people think they can do something about a dementia risk, our research with RSPH here told us that around 70% of people think they can influence their brain health, and they're the same thing, or at least we're going to set out to make them the same thing. So this has told us that talking the language of brain health, and you can connect people and hopefully move them from that awareness that Samuel was talking about into some action. But all we had was the concept of brain health. What do you do with that? How do you turn that into a campaign? How do you put it across to the public? We turned to Claremont for some help, and Ian will tell us what we did.
Thanks, Tim. First thing to say, I think, is it's such a privilege to be invited to work on this project. It's a dream brief for Claremont. It's the sort of thing we exist to do, to try to figure out how to take a complex problem, a knotty issue that Tim has described, and turn it into a campaign that can change behaviour. And but this was also personal to me. I mean, Tim mentioned at the start, many of us have got connections to Alzheimer's, and I'm included in that. My granddad had Alzheimer's disease, and I saw the impact that his slow decline, slow fading away with Alzheimer's had on my family, and particularly my dad. And so this really means a lot to me. And so it's a campaign that I've invested a lot of time and energy into in the last few years. But as Tim said, we're still learning. And so what we'll present is where we've got to, but it's still a journey, and we're still trying to figure out the best ways to take this forward. Where we started was we were tasked essentially with developing phase 1 of the campaign as a proof of concept pilot, really. It was our job was to kind of prove that there's a public appetite for hearing from Alzheimer's Research UK on this issue, and to establish brain health as a thing, to start to build a brand for the charity, a campaign brand on this issue, and then to grow it from there. And but we were mindful there were quite a few elephant traps that we had to avoid as well. So we didn't want people to confuse brain health with mental health, which was obviously, getting a lot of attention, and we didn't want people to conflate the two. We didn't want to imply that people's dementia is anyone's own fault, and we needed to ensure we were being helpful, not giving people an extra burden. And we didn't want Alzheimer's Research UK just to sort of join the masses of organisations just lecturing people about how to live their lives. And so we had to kind of navigate a path to a campaign solution that would enable us to start a new conversation on this issue, and find a way forward. And we find that when tackling a challenge like that often co-designing the solution is the right way forward. So we took a co-design approach. We recruited a group of people who matched our primary target audience for this campaign. Initially, we defined that as people in their 40s and 50s whose lives had been touched by dementia in some way. And the goal was to sort of form essentially a partnership between us as the kind of the experts on behaviour change communications, Alzheimer's Research UK as the experts on the subject matter, and that audience as the experts on their lived experience of the condition. So that's where we started. Sorry, my cursor's being a bit slow. It's not letting me move on. Apologies, I don't see the next slide. Okay. So what insights did we get, and what did we take away from that work? The first thing was we had to ensure that it was clear this wasn't just another health campaign with the same old messages, but that we had new news to share, and essentially that dementia isn't inevitable and you can do something to reduce your risk. But also, we knew that people in middle age don't expect a dementia campaign to be aimed at them. And even if they do, they may be put off by it. And so we needed to find an accessible entry point to talking about dementia that made it relevant to the lives of people in middle age today. We needed to make it feel authentic and relatable, both in the language we used and in the visual style. And we had to signal that we were speaking to them. And finally, we couldn't assume that even if our audience cared about dementia, that they would engage with our call to action. So we needed to grab their attention by trying to stir emotions a little bit, motivating people to engage with the why, around why they should take action to look after their brain health now. And it was clear also that people didn't just value the big stuff, like memories and relationships, but also everyday function. So the ability to tie a shoelace, to make a cup of tea, etc. Through our co-design, it became very clear that these smaller impacts that Alzheimer's can take away from people over time are a little bit easier and more tangible for people to contemplate the threat of losing, and that felt more arresting. And so we had to kind of sorry, there was a build there I forgot to show you. So we had to kind of really factor that in to the creative we went on to develop. So this led us to this messaging narrative, and I won't read it all, and I'm not going to dwell on this, but essentially we took a positive route into the subject to try to win permission to introduce more serious messaging about the threat of dementia, taking away what people hold dear, before immediately supporting that with hope and reassurance that you can do something to reduce your risk. And this led us to a new campaign. So Think Brain Health was born from this, and this was intended to be a new, distinctive kind of campaign for the charity, consumer friendly, not science heavy, hopefully something that could become the start of a new national conversation. It was intended from the outset to be a versatile campaign platform on which we could mount a range of future activities related to looking after our brain health, a campaign that could begin in the awareness space, but with potential to move into behaviour change in time. And Think Brain Health rests on 3 pillars, which all contribute to improving your brain health. And I won't go into the detail on this. If you're interested in finding out more about what sits behind these pillars, please visit the campaign website. But those are essentially love your heart, stay sharp, and keep connected. And all of the content on the website is centered around these pillars. So after creating the visual identity for the campaign and building that online hub, we launched a digital marketing campaign, and the results were hugely encouraging off the back of this. And remember, this was our proof of concept in phase 1. We had over 500,000 web visits within 6 weeks to the campaign website, most of whom had never visited the site before. And 10,000 of those people then took part in an online quiz and signed up to hear more about brain health. And we'd proved there was a public appetite for this. So we ticked the box of what we were trying to achieve with phase 1. But we were all very aware that for phase 2, we needed to adapt the campaign so that it moved a bit more quickly to resolving the problem we were posing in the creative phase 1. And this led us to this adapted approach, which was the focus for February this year. And our creative focused on a series of brain health tips. So giving our audience practical advice about how to reduce their risk of dementia. And we developed 40 tips in total, which sat on the website. And many of those were animated for social media to produce more engaging content. And the campaign ran across digital channels as well as a radio campaign, and again generated hundreds of thousands of clicks through to the website. So people were taking action. But we were still of the view that although we felt we had established that there was an appetite for this, and we'd started to raise awareness of brain health as a concept, we knew that to be effective in supporting people to change behaviour, we needed to move past just raising awareness of brain health and why people should take it seriously. We needed to provide the tools and the support to make it easier for people to put together their own brain health plan. And so we're planning to launch phase 3 early in 2023, and so you're getting a bit of a sneak peek here. And we're going to focus on our first Think Brain Health product, which is a self-assessment tool called the Think Brain Health Check-in. And what you can see here is a few screen grabs of what that will look like from a work in progress product that we're developing alongside our partner agency, William Joseph. And a quick plug for Samuel and his contribution. We We're also developing a 6-step onward journey via SMS and email for people who engage with the tool, to provide ideas, tools and support to help people create that brain health plan that's tailored to the results they get from completing the questionnaire in the tool. And so we've worked with Samuel to apply behavioural theory to this work, for example, aiming to dial up personalisation, such as addressing users by their name and allowing users to take different paths depending on their interests and needs. We're using a commitment device with a simple web form that will allow people to create and share their brain health plan. And crucially, we're enabling people to make specific implementation intentions through the use of if-then plans that are quite specific about the small behaviours that people can identify off the back of using the tool that they want to do in their lives that will start to improve how they're doing against one or more of those 3 pillars. So I'm going to hand back to Tim now, who's going to talk about the impact of this in the future vision.
Thanks, Ian. Yep. So as Ian mentioned, really a lot of what we've done so far is proof of concept, because this is new news. The idea of brain health as a concept is pretty new to people. So we are or have been mainly in this awareness space, but as we just saw, we're just about to start moving into what we hope will be the sort of behavioural change phase for it. So these impact stats on screen here speak more to the awareness side of things, but the concept was proven, I think, in terms of public appetite for this idea. The click-through rate that we saw across the 2 digital campaigns that Ian mentioned was twice what we had planned it to be, and the cost per click was only half what we planned as well. So in terms of how the platforms were finding it and the audience were responding to it, good is the answer to that. And since we've launched, we've had well over now 1.1 million web visits since we launched it, and 91% of the people that come into that website are new to AI UK as well. So it's obviously driving interest in a new audience. And of course, those people can come to Alzheimer's Research UK and potentially engage with some of our other programs, and that's all good for acquisition, as other charity people on this webinar will attest. So after the first phase as well, we offered a really light touch email journey after that. It was really kind of news based. The 10,000 people signed up for that journey, which was encouraging, and the open rate, as you can see there, was nearly twice what we expect for our email comms, and our baseline is 25% already, which is quite good in itself. So really good level of interest in the content, and I suppose just beginning to edge into the behavior side of things in terms of people's takeaways from seeing the campaign and engaging with the content. We saw that around 72% of people thought it was possible to reduce their dementia risk. And remember, our baseline in terms of what public understanding is around half of that. So of course, this is a self-selecting cohort that have engaged with the content, but at least we can take away that idea of dementia risk reduction is something that's really landing well with that audience. And then finally, this first pigeon step into behavior changes is sentiment or intention to act. And we can see that 88% of people who engage with the campaign say that they would be more likely to take steps towards that healthier lifestyle, which is encouraging. Again, the cohort is what it is, but this at least gives us encouragement to build on this idea and get it out there even further. Thanks, Ian. Let's go on to the next slide. In terms of what we want to do next and our vision for this idea, we absolutely see that partnership is crucial for it, really. You know, we're a relatively small, growing charity, but still relatively small. We can only reach so many people under our own steam, so we see partnership as absolutely crucial. And here are a few partners on screen that we're already delighted to be working with. Duolingo, up there, the language learning app, really fantastic for our Stay Sharp pillar and encouraging people to challenge themselves. Iceland Foods, being a long-time partner for the charity, and they really did a fantastic campaign last month in September. If you went into an Iceland store during the month and bought your fresh fruit and veg from the supermarket, you would have seen our Think Brain Health stickers and content around their website that you could see. And they also donated £100,000 towards the program as well. So really tantalizing first step towards retail partnerships that get in front of consumers in an enormous way that we can't do by ourselves. We're a charity partner to Parkrun. They're really interested in this concept a whole new reason, another reason to get involved with Parkrun and run and volunteer with them. Lots more work I think we can do with them in future. Similarly with England Athletics and their running programs, grassroots running programs, lots of interest there. But it's not just kind of the more obvious fit, actually. So we're fortunate to have the AMG Petronas Mercedes Formula One team as one of our partners, and their staff were really fascinated in this idea, and they see that as an offer as part of their kind of corporate wellbeing program. So there's a really interesting fit there. Alzheimer's Research UK challenged them to a go-kart racing night a couple of weeks ago, and I can tell you that we lost. And then Warburton's as well. Again, just it's such a well-known brand in front of consumers. Really nice way to get a consumer-friendly message out there. So they've been helping us a bit, and actually some of their staff were involved in the co-design process that Ian mentioned earlier. Ian, if we can move on. So in terms of where we're headed over the next few years, I think brain health is absolutely here to stay for Alzheimer's Research UK. We're increasing our levels of investment in this each year. Prevention is obviously a cornerstone of what this charity is here to deliver, and this program is absolutely central to delivering on that. So we just want to deepen our engagement, and the check-in that Ian showed you a few moments ago is a key part of that as well, to give people that first tool to sort of understand how they're living their lives in terms of brain health, and create some agency for them to make some decisions about what they do next. So I think that's going to be really important for us. Building the campaign over time, obviously ramping it up. Hopefully we get more and more support and partners on board, and we can elevate the budget, reach more people, do more good with this. That's absolutely what we want to do. Partnership, of course, as we just talked about, and the potential for even more products to help people activate against all these different risk areas in future. So we're really excited about the potential, and we have to do all we can on it. With 1 million people living with dementia, and unfortunately more set to develop the condition in future. This is one of our real weapons to heading that off and doing some good. So we're really going to be leaning into this. And that brings us to the end. So thank you very much for your attention. And I'm sure Ian and I will be delighted to look at your questions as we get through to the panel. Thank you very much.
Huge thank you to Tim and to Ian. I've worked on Think Brain Health for a while now, and the fact 40% of dementias are preventable so absolutely blows my mind every time I hear it. So thank you, that's really exciting stuff. And hopefully some behaviour change to come as well, which will be great. We're going to hand over to Jen now. Jen, would you mind please sharing your screen and coming onto camera?
Hello.
Hello, excellent. We're going to transition from brains to bowels now, I think. Which is a sentence I've never said before, but let's see if it works.
Let's see if I can share my screen.
And just to remind everyone, to keep the questions coming to the Q&A. We'll have a bit of time at the end to ask questions to the speakers. That's looking good, Jen, so I'm going to turn my camera off and hand over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Michaela, and thank you to what really interesting presentations we've had so far. So hopefully I can keep people's interest up whilst talking Lou roll. And I think the reason why a good place to start is maybe here with just a bit of a stark look at what's happening with bowel cancer. Bowel cancer is the 4th most common cancer in the UK, but it's also the 2nd biggest cancer killer. And it shouldn't be, because it's preventable, it's treatable, it's curable if it's diagnosed at its earliest stages. But if you look at the slide I've shared there, you can see that for the 42,000 people who are diagnosed every year, 46% are diagnosed at stage 3 and 4, 7,500 people we don't know the stage 4. Only 37% are diagnosed at stage 1 and 2. So there's a huge challenge for us there, because people are being diagnosed at later stages when it's much more difficult to treat, and your outcomes are much worse. If you look at the points I've got down there, if you're diagnosed at stage 1, pretty much most people will survive that, 97% survival rate, and that drops dramatically to fewer than 1 in 10 if you're diagnosed at stage 4. If you look also, you'll see that only 6 to 10% of people are diagnosed through the bowel cancer screening program, and up to a quarter of people are diagnosed in emergency settings when their prognosis is going to be very serious for them. So there's a huge challenge for us here in raising awareness for sure, but as Samuel said earlier, awareness on its own is not enough. We have to get people to act, understand those symptoms and act quickly. So here's the challenge. In March, we did a survey of the population to find out how many people could name any of the symptoms of bowel cancer. And just under half of the UK population couldn't name a single symptom. And some research carried out subsequently found that about a third of people experiencing those symptoms would still delay speaking to a GP about those symptoms for around 3 months. So even if people are experiencing those symptoms, there's still a reluctance to go and talk to the GP about it. And you know, a lot of that is to do with the challenge of the embarrassment factor around around some of those symptoms. So the two most common symptoms are bleeding from your bottom or blood in your poo, or a persistent unexplained change in your bowel habit. Now, there's some other red flag symptoms as well. And you will all know that these symptoms here could easily be something else. And actually, for most people, it will be something else. Of the people who are referred for colonoscopy, just 1 in 12 will actually have bowel cancer. So you've got a challenge there of people thinking, oh, it's probably piles or constipation or any of those other things. I don't need to bother my doctor. Or worrying about, you know, the NHS has been very, very busy. My GP, I'm constantly hearing on the news that GPs are struggling. So I don't want to bother my doctor with something that's probably pretty common. So why loo roll? Well, there's a direct link because people will notice those symptoms when they're going to the loo. And also it's universal. We all use loo roll. So we've long thought that, you know, loo roll has the power actually to do something transformatory and save lives. So we launched a Get on a Roll campaign, and essentially we have a long-term supporter called Cara Hoof. She was diagnosed with stage 4 bowel cancer about the same time that our patron Dame Deborah James was diagnosed, and the two knew each other well. And Cara works at Marks and Spencer's. She has tried to get Marks and Spencer's to put the symptoms of bowel cancer on their loo rolls without success over the years, until a new chief executive arrived, Stuart. And he did a suggestion, a sort of suggestion program with the staff, asking for ideas of what they'd like to see Marks and Spencer's do next. Cara basically tried once more and said, you know, can you put the symptoms of bowel cancer on the loo roll? And he said yes. So when we knew that Marks and Spencer's was going to do this, we essentially thought, how can we mobilize our community to target all the other supermarkets and challenge them to put the symptoms on their own brands of loo roll? And when Marks and Spencer's announced their partnership that they were going to do this, Stuart agreed to challenge the other supermarkets to follow suit. And our patron, Dame Deborah James, she basically amplified our call for action. At the moment, at that time, she was very prominent in the news because she had sadly announced that she was moving to end-of-life care for her bowel cancer. And so I think the other thing that was for us was really key was to get that campaign out quickly. We're a very small team, but we were able to launch that campaign across our own channels within 48 hours of M&S agreeing to do this. And within 3 weeks, all the major retailers, plus Andrex, had agreed to do this, which was just phenomenal, really. And I suppose as an aside, when we're talking about behaviour change, it was really interesting to see that something we tried to get off the ground for a number of years it finally became successful with just one supermarket agreeing to do it. Marks and Spencer's went first, and all the others followed suit very quickly. So I've got one partnerships person at Barkhamster UK, and she was getting 2, 3, 4 supermarkets calling us every day saying, we want to get involved. How do we get involved? So that is absolutely unprecedented for us as an organisation. And I should say that Tesco also, Deborah managed to persuade Tesco to do the same thing through the Bowel Fund. So we had a clean sweep of awareness, which is really extraordinary. This is the launch of the M&S loo rolls over. I was really delighted to go over to Stratford to their flagship store. You can see Cara there on the right holding the loo roll. And it was quite a moment, actually. It was pretty emotional when we saw the packs that had come straight off the production line. And maybe you can just see it at the side there. There's the signs and symptoms and our logo on the front. And the picture on the right is my local M&S Simply Food, where I saw them in the wild, as it were. And I was really, really delighted, although I did get some funny looks, you know, from people thinking, why is she taking pictures of loo roll? But anyway, you know, it was lovely to see them out there. Morrison's loo rolls are also on the shelves. I think Asda and Waitrose are on the way, but they've put the symptoms on the shelf fronts in the meantime, because I now know more about the production of loo rolls, and it'll take them a little while to actually get the new wrappers onto shelves, and all the rest are following suit. So I think by the end of this month, beginning of next month, you should pretty much see those symptoms on every pack of loo roll, own brand loo roll and Andrex, anywhere. So we're really, really thrilled with that. There was a lot of media interest as well, and every time a new supermarket decided to come on board, you know, it was an opportunity for more PR. So there's huge PR on the back of this. That one is M&S in the Times. We've got Andrex on ITV, Waitrose in the Grocery Gazette, and so forth. So it's just a little flavour of the media coverage at the time. So what's next? I mean, I think what Samuel said at the start was really interesting, actually, because it's absolutely right. Awareness on its own is not enough. I don't think you can change behaviour without it, but it won't do the trick on its own. And he talked about the importance of habit, and we know that for the bowel screening programme, if that screening test comes through your front door and you do it the first time, then it's likely that you will do it every subsequent time it comes through your door. So getting people to take that first action is really, really important. So what's next for Barkhamster UK? Well, last week we had a board strategy day, and we have a strategic focus on earlier diagnosis. We think there's a huge opportunity for impact if we can get people diagnosed stage 1 and 2 rather than 3 and 4. It will save lives. We are doing some work with Andrex on insights, and I know that Ian talked there about the importance of understanding what the motivations might be for people to act on symptoms, and also understand from those people who are arriving in emergency settings, understanding better how that happened, what were the contributing factors that led to them presenting so late with emergency needs. And that could be a combination of difficulty getting to see the GP, or you know, perhaps self-medicating, popping into pharmacies and buying laxatives or hemorrhoid preparations, or just people not wanting to talk about poo or bowel habits, or people perhaps feeling you know, a sense of hopelessness about it, or maybe an inevitability if there's bowel cancer running in the family. So there's a number of reasons, and we need to understand both what will motivate people to seek action, but also what are some of the barriers. So there's quite a bit of work we need to do there. We also are really keen, we know that we can't do this on our own, so we're really keen to work with any partners who could support and help us with this. Obviously, we're talking to the NHS in all 4 nations, but we know that there are opportunities to work with several partners, and I thought it was interesting to see the partnership approach that Alzheimer's Research UK are taking, because I think that is a really smart way to get progress further and faster. I'm also aware that we have the supermarkets working with us for at least a year. Some of them have committed to 3. And we also know where are the areas of low uptake of bowel cancer screening or poor outcomes for bowel cancer. And we know that those supermarkets will have stores there. So we are thinking through how we can partner with the supermarkets in areas where there is real need, and maybe help us to start targeting some of those health inequalities. We've also been working with Claremont on a strategy for this work, and to help us think through what, if any, new partnerships, where we might want to go with this campaign next. And we know that, for example, there are a couple of football clubs who are really keen to work with us on this, and that's great. And it fits very much in terms of our target audience. But how do we decide and where those partnerships could come from next? And I think that'll be really important for us, because, as I mentioned earlier, we're a small organisation, and we don't have huge resources, so we have to make sure that any decisions we take will result in the greatest impact for people at risk of bowel cancer. And then, talking about impact, we also need to understand how successful this campaign is being. One of the ways we can do that is by continuing to take the pulse of public opinion around symptom awareness. We can also look at the numbers of people who are being referred by their GP for further investigation. And for example, to give you an idea of that, in June this year, 9,000 more people were referred by their GP for bowel cancer in potential investigation. And NHS England and we believe that is directly down to the very powerful spotlight that Dame Deborah James shone on bowel cancer right up until her final days. And so that's very heartening to see that people heard that message. They went and had those conversations with their GPs, and their GPs referred them for onward investigation. And we can also understand, we can also look at anecdotal evidence. Cara told me when we were in Stratford launching the loo rolls, because Marks and Spencer's have also got the symptoms posters on the back of loo doors in all their stores and their back offices. And she had an email from a colleague she's never met, who told her that as a result of seeing that poster on the back of the loo door where she works, she was prompted to go and speak to her GP. And it turns out that she has colitis. So that is a huge result. We can understand that by doing this, it is persuading people to go and see their GP and either rule bowel cancer out or potentially get it diagnosed early. So it's too early to tell at the moment, but we've got, you can see down there, there's also a QR code on the bottom of the awareness. And that QR code will be different for each supermarket, so we can track visits to our website prompted by the loo rolls and which supermarket they came from. So in 6 months or a year's time, we may have much more rich data about this campaign and how it's going. So I'm going to leave it there, but if anybody has any questions, I'd be delighted to answer them if I can.
Thanks very much, Jen. That's great. I still think, even knowing this beforehand, that it's amazing how much support you've managed to kind of galvanize in such a little time since June. It's been really incredible. Thank you very much for that presentation. That's great. We're going to move over to the Q&A now. So I just ask Ian and Tim to put your cameras on, your mics on, if that's all right. A lovely picture of Emily there, but she's obviously on screen with me. Hopefully everyone can see everyone. I know there's been a couple of problems throughout. Thank you, Zoom. So we're just going to kind of see how it goes. But I'm going to hand over to Emily to fire off the first question. We've got quite a few.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question to you all to begin with around the impact of celebrities being involved with causes. And of course, it's very sad events when someone dies, but it does seem that encourages people to change their behaviour in quite an immediate way. We saw the effects with Jade Goody, Deborah James, of course, and thinking about individuals like Barbara Windsor as well, people going to get their symptoms checked, speaking to their doctor, being much more aware and taking action. I just wondered how you sustain that behaviour change after the event, and how you keep that momentum going.
It's the question, actually. I was going to say it's a really good question, but actually it's the question. And we're working on that at the moment. But I think it's absolutely right that we see that when a spotlight is shone on a condition, it does prompt action to start with, and then that fades away over time. And we're determined at Barkhamster UK that doesn't happen here. There is so much unmet need. There's so, it's too important. So we're working, it's one of the questions we've been talking to Ian at Claremont about, is that what can we do to make sure that we can sustain this, and how can we use the sort of the leg up that the supermarkets are giving us to best effect, because the loo roll packs are amazing, but what else can we be doing to keep that awareness up? So I might have the answer to that in maybe few weeks time, but but it's absolutely critical for us as an organization.
Thanks, Jen. Tim, do you have anything to add to that in terms of your experience of working with individuals who've had Alzheimer's who are in the media spotlight?
Yeah, it's well handled by Jen, because I don't have the secret answer to how you continue this unless you just keep going at it, keep storytelling, keep doing the PR. I mean, for us, really, it's about getting people willing to talk about their diagnosis, getting people willing to talk about dementia, because it's been hidden behind the curtains for a long time. And we've definitely seen, as Jen has, when someone sadly with a high profile shares their experience, it does give people a boost to talk about it themselves, which is great and necessary, particularly in our world. So we saw that with Terry Pratchett, and we saw that with Barbara Windsor. I suppose just a really kind of slightly cheap but practical thing you can do is just hark back to those people in your own work. So we've named reports after Terry, and it's interesting that the government's new soon to be launched strategy around dementia is actually called the Dame Barbara Windsor Dementia Mission. And I think that's a masterstroke, really, because it just reminds us on every reference about what she meant and what she did, further embeds that permission for people to talk about it. So well done, Boris, which is not something I've said very often.
Oh, it's really hard to take away. Wait. Sorry, Jem, you can say something.
Yeah, I was going to say, Tim, that is really interesting, because I've spoken to so many people who've had their own bowel cancer diagnosis over the summer, who said that seeing Deborah talk about her experience and her story has made them feel that that they can do the same thing. It's given them the confidence to do the same thing. And so I think it's so important that those conversations are almost like ripples in a pond, aren't they? And it keeps that awareness up, keeps people talking, and keeps people sharing their stories. It's really important.
Yeah, and we've actually seen, we run something called a dementia attitudes monitor every 2 years, so we can see at a national level how perceptions and awareness are changing over time. And we've seen a greater willingness for people to both seek diagnosis and discuss their diagnosis. And I think it's, examples like Deborah and Terry, where you see this step change, and then hopefully you got a new plateau and you build from there. I think that's what we're seeing in dementia anyway.
Thank you. I wondered if we could go to one of the questions that's been put forward by Annalise. She's asking around behavioural work with clinicians. So, Jen, a question for you in thinking about how do you do behaviour change upstream? So it's not just at the individual level, thinking about the symptoms that they might be able to recognise, but actually about practitioners and clinicians and the diagnosis work that they can be doing. Is there any behaviour change work to be done there?
I would say one of the things that we've done in Wales, we ran a pilot in Wales with pharmacies actually. It's really, really interesting because pharmacists will see lots of people who are self-medicating bowel cancer symptoms, you know, people popping in for those hemorrhoid preparations or the laxatives, or, you know, and so we did a really nice pilot in Wales that worked brilliantly, where we had these things called wobblers, where there's a little thing that comes off a shelf and then it's got a card on it with the symptoms of bowel cancer, and they wobble basically, so they catch your eye, and you can put them where the red flag products are, you know, that people would come by. And then we coupled that with some other awareness materials that pharmacies can use, and an online training resource for pharmacy staff to enable them to better have those conversations with people, with their customers who are coming in to buy those products. And that worked really, really well as a way of supporting pharmacies and pharmacy staff to perhaps identify people who really could benefit from a conversation with their GP. We are very keen to invest in similar support for primary care, because I think, you know, if you're going to send people to GPs, it's only right that you provide something to support them if more people are coming through the door. And that's really important with younger people. Bowel cancer is most common in people over the age of 60, but there is a small and significant number of younger people. It's about 6% of the total, but that's still about 2,500 people a year who are under the age of 50, and they often struggle to get a diagnosis because in the vast majority of cases, it really is something else. So people like Deborah, you know, she went time and again to her GP with symptoms before she was finally diagnosed. So it's about greater awareness that bowel cancer can and does affect younger people, even though it's rare. And I was speaking at an oncology conference on Friday, and several clinicians told me that they're seeing what they called an influx of younger patients with bowel cancer in their clinics at the moment. One was treating a young man aged 23. And I wonder whether, it's impossible to know, but I wonder whether that's as a result of the awareness that Deborah shone on younger people in particular towards the end of her life, and whether what those oncologists are seeing now is the people who have gone to their GP, been referred and diagnosed as a result of that. I don't think it's an impossible stretch, but I have no proof.
I've got a question for Tim actually on that exact topic with, I would call them kind of atypical audiences, or audiences that are not in the mass of people that are affected by bowel cancer or dementia, for example. I know, Jen, you obviously, it was the Never Too Young campaign Bowel Cancer UK had, aimed at people under 50. Deborah did a lot to that effect. Tim, from your perspective, you're obviously talking to midlife adults, and that's not typically a group that you would associate with dementia, or maybe even stereotypically. Has that been a problem in reaching those people? I mean, do people think the campaign is for people like them?
Well, I think the data bears out that we're reaching the right audience brilliantly. But I mean, that question just kind of gets to the root of why it's Think Brain Health and not Prevent Dementia, isn't it? Because we have to talk to people in a language that resonates with them. I think what we're seeing with midlifers in general is a greater interest in health and well-being. We're all wearing fitness trackers. We're interested in how we're sleeping, and all these metrics are part of our lives now. So I think framing Think Brain Health in quite a consumer-friendly way feeds into that broader push towards people having agency on their health and well-being in general, which is why Think Brain Health looks and feels the way it does. And I think what we're trying to do is establish brain health as the kind of last sort of pillar of health and well-being. Our sense often of our own health tends to finish at the neck, and it's our job to try and head north of that and get people thinking about their brains in the same way they think about their hearts, and hopefully their bowels, and from Jen's work as well.
And Tim, do you think that some people's behaviour is immovable, while there are certain audiences that you think, you know, you've obviously got limited resources, you need to think about where you target your efforts? Are there certain individuals that you think that this campaign just won't reach?
Yeah, no, there are. Yeah, I mean, we can't pretend that we're reaching everyone at the moment. We're absolutely not. And in fact, there are lots of areas where the need is really great, and we need to be a bit more tactical. So we know, Ian mentioned in his part of the presentation that we shifted our audience from phase 1 to phase 2 towards more C2DE audiences, where we know the need is greater, and we know there's a huge amount of work to do in underserved audiences, in minority ethnic groups, and we have to work hard and differently to reach those people. Just putting Facebook ads out there is not going to reach those people. So the future, I think, of this campaign will be more fragmented, for want of a better word, tactically deployed to the audiences who really need to hear this stuff. It's a big push for us in the next couple of years.
That's interesting. There's a quite a bit of crossover between the work we're doing with Tim and the team and the work we're doing with Jen and her team on that very issue of trying to make sure we're really intentional about the audiences we can reach, whilst also at the same time looking for how can we maximize the potential of those partnership opportunities that have got quite broad reach. And so I think you can do both at the same time, but you've got to be more intentional and more thoughtful about those audiences that are going to find it hardest to engage and hardest to act on the messages. And I think certainly when we look at the bowel cancer work, for example, we know there's plenty of evidence out there that people from more deprived backgrounds, people from certain ethnic minority groups, are those that are least likely to go to a GP seeking advice on symptoms they're experiencing. And so we've got to go the extra mile to try and figure out what are the barriers that are distinct to those groups that are getting in the way. How can we develop campaign activity and creative, etc., that's going to try and overcome or mitigate those barriers as best we can. But you can do that, I believe, in the space of a broad campaign that's also got, through those partnerships, through above the line media spend, a broad reach at the same time.
Thanks, Ian. And we've obviously mentioned partnerships quite a lot, and those corporate partnerships are essential for these campaigns. In a dual way, I guess. You've got the fundraising element, you need to have that backing, but you also need to have organisations that are relevant to the cause. And I wondered, Tim, if you could say a bit more about the choices you've made about the partnerships that you've had for this campaign, and how those are helping to actually drive behaviour change, not just fund the work that you do.
Yeah, and we're looking at this a lot now. Over the next few years, partnerships going to be a big emphasis, and Claremont are helping us brilliantly with that as well. But I think that the value, or the future value of partnership for Think Brain Health, as much as these brands, just resonate with consumers and help you with your reach, is that these brands also have an opportunity to change the system around the people we're trying to help, which is what Samuel was talking about earlier. We can reach people, but we only have limited abilities as a charity to change the system. So Iceland, for example, they're serving kind of lower economic groups, aren't they? And they have the products that those people are buying. So if we can frame those products in the context of Think Brain Health, then not only are we reaching millions of people, but it's it's very literally helping them to make the right decisions in their lives. And I think that's what we're going to be looking at in terms of partnership in future, how our partners interact with consumers and practical differences that they can implement in their lives beyond just reaching them with the message.
Thank you. Jen, I don't know if you've got anything to add on that in terms of the sort of partnership opportunities that you're exploring, or any particular partners that you think have been really valuable to helping to support changes in behaviour.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, and again, it's been really helpful working with Claremont on a basically criteria to, because I think for us, we need to focus where we can have the greatest impact, because we don't have limitless resources. And this campaign has been eye-catching, and it has brought other companies or organizations to us to say, oh, we could do this or we could do that. Now that's great, but we want to avoid being like a sort of seven-year-old five-a-side football team where everybody's running around after one go, oh, I do get quite distracted by shiny things, I must admit. So we need to be really focused and really intentional, I think is the word that Ian used, about where we take those partnerships next to have the greatest effect. And as I say, that football clubs is really interesting. Pharmacy is really interesting. Those supermarkets, many of them have pharmacies in the store. So there's certainly quite a bit of food for thought for us.
Great. It's fishing where the fish are, we always say. It's like going to people where they're naturally found and not asking people to go out of their way to make a change.
I think that's absolutely key, and that's something I learned in the decade or more that I worked in HIV, is that particularly, you know, if you've got a health condition which is hard to talk about, people often don't want to talk about HIV or bowel cancer or Alzheimer's. You know, when you've got conditions that are hard to talk about, you know, you have to find a way of having those conversations that is accessible and relevant to people. And then you have to go and have those conversations where people are. You can't expect them to come to you.
Thank you.
Exactly. Yeah.
I wanted to go back to a question, actually two questions that Howard and Ollie, but they've got similarities in terms of thinking about the framing of the name of the campaign. So the initial question from Saud was around the confusion between mental health and brain health and how to resolve that. And Ollie was asking about whether you'd done any kind of prior work in exploring whether this term brain health was actually going to work. So what your kind of testing process was at the pilot stage before launching this, and making sure that those words were appropriate to your audience.
And for Jen, the word poo actually is something we've discussed at great length.
We'll come on to that as well.
Yeah.
Shall I take that? So on the mental health question, yeah, I think whilst we wanted to reframe dementia prevention as about brain health predominantly, we never completely divorced the two messages. You know, it was always critical in all of our creative output and then the onward journey from that we were coupling brain health with the need, the need and the importance of preventing dementia, which I think helped offset that risk of it falling into the mental health space. Obviously, also we were talking a lot about those three pillars, the things you can do: stay sharp, keep connected, love your heart. And I think by talking about those things as the actions you can take to protect your brain health, I think that takes you to a new place that people don't hear. I mean, there's some overlap, I would acknowledge, around, you know, good mental health. Obviously, there's things you can do like exercise and healthy eating and living well that can contribute there. But I think the staying connected and the keeping sharp stuff, those elements were sort of the new news, specifically in relation to brain health, that combination of those three pillars. And I think also, you know, we've been very thoughtful about the way we've developed the tool and the onward journey to ensure that as we're asking people questions about their lifestyle and about the way they live their life, we're explaining why as we do it. And so the science bit is coming through in that content. So anyone who engages with the campaign, certainly I'd be surprised if anyone does leave it feeling like that we're talking about mental health. So I think but it's always something at the forefront of our minds, and we've been careful about that. On the testing stuff, yeah, I mean, we went through, as I said, a co-design process with a group that stayed with us throughout in phase one. We kept returning to them, having kind of heard what they'd told us before, reflecting on it, iterating the development of the campaign and going back to them. But at the same time, we often do this where we do use co-design. We were very clear that after a period of time, a co-design group stops being capable of coming to a subject with fresh perspective. And so we did set up separate to that some testing groups as well with different audience segments to ensure the messages were landing, and we absolutely zigzagged our way to the final creative, listening to what we were hearing and adjusting.
Thanks, Ian. And yeah, Jen, do you want to talk about the debates you had around language, use of the word poo?
Do you want to talk about poo, Jen? I've used a lot of poo.
It's really interesting actually, because I've been on, I've done a lot of media interviews in the last few months, and I've never talked about poo so much in my life actually. And it's really interesting, the broadcasters' willingness to have that conversation and talk about symptoms. You know, BBC Breakfast, you know, while people are having their breakfast and, you know, you get going on and talking about it. But I think when you look at the sort of more medicalized language around bowel cancer symptoms, they often talk about use words and language like, bowel movement or stools or whatever that, people don't say in real life. And it's just really important to say it how it is, even if it might be a bit uncomfortable. But I have to say, I'm so used to it now. I sort of don't really, don't really think of it. But I do recognize that for other people, talking about it can be uncomfortable. I mean, I'll be honest, when you're 5-6 years old, you literally don't talk about anything else. And then all of a sudden you grow up and it's too embarrassing to talk about. So hopefully we can, and that's one thing that Deborah did so brilliantly, because she talked about it very honestly and with humor and her own experience. And she always said, check your poo. And it seems that looking at the figures from referral from GP over the summer, people have been doing just that. So it's clearly a message that resonates, but we've got more work to do in terms of reaching people who are already experiencing health inequalities.
That's a big task for us, I think, as well, creatively. That embarrassment factor, thinking back to Convey and the stuff that Sam went through, that embarrassment factor is a really big barrier to getting people just to speak to their doctor in the first place. And there's a lot of studies where we've seen, it's the last thing someone mentions. They'll go through all their other health problems, and then they'll say, oh, by the way, I did find some blood. People are embarrassed by it. And I think overcoming that and the way that Deborah used the language she did is really helpful for us creatively as well. So I think we're going to wrap there. We have questions? We're good?
Yeah, we're good.
Great. So thank you so much to all of our speakers, and to you if you're still watching. We've had quite a lot of people join and quite a lot of people still with us. We haven't had many drops, which is really always very good to see. And we've learned a lot of interesting things today. If you'd like to attend more events, please feel free to follow us. Not literally, of course, that's highly creepy, but virtually. And we'll tell you about our future events. Just another reminder that we're on Twitter and LinkedIn. And you can also sign up to Clare Mail, our very occasional newsletter on Claremont's website. But I think that's all for now. So thank you very much and have a good day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.